and support for this ITUC webinar, and our focus will be trade unions advancing the care agenda. So whether it's good morning, good afternoon, good day, good night for some of us. I welcome you all to this ITUC webinar, and I look forward to being with you online for the next hour and a half for some interesting discussions. Some housekeeping issues. Of course, interpretation is available in English, French, and Spanish. Please find the globe icon at the bottom of your screens and click on it to select your language, and then press mute on the original video. Of course, this is a respectful place. Please share questions and comments with the chat or through the Q&A session that we will have after the panelists have spoken. So briefly speaking in terms of this occasion of the International Day for Care and Support, the ITUC releases its report on trade unions advancing the care agenda, featuring country case studies from Australia, the Philippines, and Chile. The report will be officially launched during the 1.5-hour webinar, where trade union representatives from these 3 countries will discuss their work on the care economy in the last years, including what have been the main wins and ongoing challenges. This webinar aims to showcase trade unions' crucial role in advancing the care agenda at national level, drawing from the 2024 ILO resolution on decent work and the care economy. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you the panel for this important occasion. And our speakers are Ms. Jane Stinson, who is the writer of the report, Trade Unions Advancing the Care Agenda, Ms. Sasha Beldova McClelland from ACTU Australia, Ms. John Cesario, KMU Philippines, Ms. Adriana Chiu Pinay, Care Workers Transnational and Central Philippines, and Ms. Karen Pama from CUT Chile. Now I would like to move on to the panelists, and to start with the panel discussion for this important occasion. And as I've mentioned, we have a group of very esteemed, very established, knowledgeable speakers as panelists today. And our first speaker will be Ms. Jane Stinson, who is the writer of the report, Trade Unions Advancing the Care Agenda. So I will pose a few questions to each of the panelists, and the questions to Jane. What are the key findings of the report, Trade Unions Advancing the Care Agenda? And this report features case studies from Australia, Philippines, and Chile. What common themes have emerged across these diverse contexts? And also, based on your research, what has proven most effective in getting governments to prioritize the care economy? So, Jane, over to you now.
Thank you, Jyotika. And I'll just share my screen. I prepared a few slides that speak to those questions. So first, before answering the first question, I just want to thank a few key people, certainly those of you at the ITUC for the opportunity to do this research, and as well to the wonderful women on this panel for the time that they took to talk with us. And there were a few others who also took time to talk to us and send us documents. And I'd also like to thank my co-author, Robert Fox, who's online today too. So I think some of the key findings are that unions in these countries are advancing the ITUC's key demands and are making important gains to strengthen the care economy through a variety of different strategies, which are outlined in the report, and you'll hear a bit about today. Together, they're advocating the ITUC's key demands to governments, which are to recognize care as a human right and as a public good, to increase public investments in the care sector, to adopt care policies, and to ensure decent care work for all care workers. as well, the ILO's 5R framework on decent care work is being advanced through this work as well, in that through these three countries, informal care is being recognized as work, not as a woman's family duty, that care work is being rewarded with a living wage, workplace rights, and social protection, that gendered domestic caring work is being reduced and redistributed through different mechanisms, through the introduction of formal care programs, through labor legislation and contract provisions that are more family friendly. All of these are extremely important. And as well, that care workers' needs are being represented through the collective bargaining and the legislative and social campaigns that have been educating, mobilizing workers and their allies in these countries. So the report features case studies from Australia, the Philippines, and Chile. And the question is, what common themes emerged? Well, first, I just want to emphasize how very different these three countries are. In that if you think of them, say, on a spectrum of formal care systems, we have the Philippines at one end of the spectrum, where it is the most informal care work among the three. There's the largest portion of informal workers, the lowest levels of unionization, the greatest unmet social needs in terms of care, and a government that is most hostile to labor among these three. And at the other end of the spectrum in Australia, it's the most developed welfare state among the three, with the highest degree of unionization and most centralized bargaining. Which is incredibly important in terms of the strategies that the movements can use. And in Chile, it's in between, with a mix of informal care and formal care programs. But an extremely important development in Chile is the broad-based social discussions that are going on now about what care services should look like and how they should be formalized in the Constitution. So despite these vast differences between these countries, there were a few common themes. I'll first start with the positive. Positive developments included that there are important steps being taken to formalize care services. And in doing so, that's creating more formal jobs. It's making sure that they're more decently paid and that they have social benefits and protections. And as well, unions and union confederations are really coordinating their efforts and using a range of opportunities, but coordinating efforts not only between the unions, but also with social movements to really develop a broad-based wave of demand for change, and using whatever opportunities are available to them to create programs, improve wages and conditions. And because these workers, especially the care workers who are getting the most attention, are the most overlooked and exploited, disproportionately include women, racialized, immigrant, and migrant workers. So those conditions are improving for those workers in need. But in terms of another sort of set of common themes are more disturbing, and that is particularly concerning the private delivery of care and private ownership of care services. In some cases, like in Chile and Australia, for example, there's a deeply entrenched private sector that is providing some care services, and they will and are opposing the loss of their ability to make a profit from care services, despite evidence that the public universal care services are important. So this fight for public systems is up against often deeply invested private interests who want to make money from these care services, despite the fact that private services are usually inaccessible to those with low incomes. They're often of more poor quality. Workers' wages and staffing levels are kept low, all to maximize profits. So our report showed the value of government investment in care. We used data from the ILO's investment simulator that shows exactly how public investment in care services in a particular country can benefit the economy and boost it, stimulating economic growth and making services more equitable for workers and users. So the third question was, based on this research, what's proven most effective in getting governments to prioritize the care economy? And there are many things you'll be able to read about in the report, but I'll just pull out a few. One, I think, is what I'd call having a clear programmatic strategy. And what I mean by that is a clear vision of what needs to be done, which could take the form of principles or demands to be achieved. But also it's having a sort of comprehensive plan and how to affect change that involves working with others to mount significant public pressure. And in the report, there are examples in each of these countries of this, where national union confederations have put care at the center of their economy's policy agenda by proposing a national care framework. So they've been comprehensive and bold and a clear vision. In Australia, they proposed a national care compact. In Chile, the CUT proposed a national system of support and care. And in the Philippines, a coalition involving union confederations developed a national care economy framework. So it's this thinking big and laying out a comprehensive vision for providing care services in each of these countries. And working with others, which is the second key point, I think, is that alliances are essential to bring about change. And these are all sorts of different alliances. Alliances with political parties. We see in the case of Australia that the Labor government has been a very important ally in helping to bring about legislative changes that were advocated by the ACTU. And in the Philippines, we also see, you'll read about in the report how the absence of strong political support for formalizing and raising the wages of local healthcare providers, the barangay workers, undercut national legislation at a sort of final stage. But it was the alliances between unions and popular organizations in the Philippines that got it to that place in the first place, and they've been key to the gains that have been made and will be key to the gains going future. And similarly, in Chile, you'll read about and hear about how the CUT has been working with women's organizations and others to really shape that social debate about how care should be reflected in the new constitution and what a new care system should look like. So I'll end with those general comments and turn it over to my panelists so that you can hear more of their specifics of their experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing the highlights from your report. And I know there is a lot more information for you to share, but it is interesting to note how you have tried to find the commonalities and the differences despite the different kind of countries that you have worked on. So thank you very much, and we'll get back to you as we move to the other parts of our panel discussion. Now I'd like to seek the interventions from our next speaker, Ms. Sasha Peldova-McClellan from Australian Council of Trade Unions Australia. So the questions for Sasha are, as the report shows, Australian unions have achieved landmark pay rises for care workers, and that multi-employer and sectoral bargaining were game changers. What lessons can other unions learn from the experience of Australian unions with these mechanisms? And also, if you could share the drawings from the ILO resolution on decent work and the care economy, what challenges still remain in Australia? agenda. For example, ensuring sustainable public funding, addressing private sector resistance, closing gender pay gaps, etc. So, Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks so much for having me. It's late at night here, but it's very exciting to be part of this panel. So thanks for the opportunity. So going to your first question first around bargaining reforms and what lessons can be learned. So they have really been game changers, as you say in the question, along with other reforms to Australia's equal pay laws, and also the inclusion of gender equality objectives in the Fair Work Act, which regulates most employment in Australia. And taken together, these three big reforms have meant that we've made more progress on equal pay over the past 3 years than in the preceding 3 decades. So the impact has been enormous. The bargaining reforms alone have seen over 1 million workers added to collective agreements. That's about 1,000 workers a day in 2.5 years, which has been a 55% increase in collective agreement coverage. And those reforms have had a huge impact on care workers. So for the first time, they've provided access to bargaining for these workers who previously had no success in bargaining because of the fragmented nature of their workplaces and the small workplaces that they were in. So we've seen workers in low-paid, female-dominated industries like early childhood education, disability care, and social and community services all now able to collectively bargain for fair pay and conditions. So now about 250,000 workers are covered by a multi-employer agreement, and that includes almost 50,000 workers under the early childhood education and care agreement, which has obviously delivered long overdue pay rises for that workforce. Going to some of the lessons, I think one of the important lessons to learn is that employers in Australia always like to claim that the sky will fall in if the reforms that unions ask for occur. And once again, their claims that multi-employer bargaining would destroy the economy and lead to, industry-wide strikes and unemployment and inflation have all been proven to be completely unfounded. Instead, wages have gone up, inflation and unemployment have come down, and the reforms have contributed to a significant decrease in the gender pay gap from 14.1% to a record low of 11.5%. That gender pay gap is closing 3 times as fast under the current Labor government than it did under the previous coalition government, which was in power for a decade. So what's important, I think, to note about those employer claims and the fact that they were so wrong is that they ignored the international evidence that multi-employer bargaining, which is common in OECD countries, consistently generate benefits in employment and wage distribution and gender equality, as well as macroeconomic performance, skills, training, and workplace cooperation. So I think that's a really important takeaway. I think the success of the early childhood education collective agreement demonstrates that industries that were previously very hard to organise and to bargain in can actually be organised with the right tools and the right law reform. The way that the reforms were drafted and implemented in Australia meant that the unions could start with just 64 employers and bargain with them. And then after the agreement was finalised, they could build momentum and get in other employers to that finalised agreement. So they started with 64 employers and 12,000 workers, and currently they're at 516 employers and 50,000 workers. So the agreement's been able to be escalated up and have a much bigger impact than it did have at the beginning. And that's the largest number of workers and employers covered by any enterprise agreement in Australia's history. I think another important lesson from multi-employer bargaining was that the new reforms allowed unions to bring the government to the bargaining table if they were responsible for the funding. And that's really crucial to the success of multi-employer bargaining in these female-dominated industries. And the unions were also quite clever. the agreement set the stage for the government to announce a 15% pay increase for early childhood education workers if they had a mechanism to pass that on. And the agreement is one of the recognised mechanisms to pass on the pay increase. So there's a significant incentive for employers to sign up to that multi-employer agreement. So by linking it to the funding model, I've had a lot of success in getting employers to sign on. Am I going for time? I'll say a couple more things. I think the reforms to Australia's equal pay laws are also important. And these have allowed unions to look at minimum rates of pay in awards, which set the safety net or the floor for what people in an industry can be paid. The Fair Work Commission now has to explicitly consider whether rates of pay in awards have been undervalued on the basis of gender. And they can therefore, if they find gender-based undervaluation, they can increase those rates of pay. And it's much simpler now to prove that than it used to be. So a lot of unions have taken up that particular path. And I think it's been important. It's an important lesson that, as well as bargaining, it's also important to think about the floor or the safety net and lifting standards and pay rates there, because the reality is that some sectors will always struggle to bargain. So we need multiple strategies. And of course, that new floor means that then even higher wages can be achieved where workers can bargain together as well. I think another great lesson is that all of these reforms have really contributed to union growth. So union membership and union density is growing for the first time in Australia in decades. And these reforms have played a massive part in that. And having multiple pathways, so the 3 different pathways, for example, to address rates of pay in female-dominated industries has meant that unions can pick what works best for them and their strategy and their members and get an outcome. So they're not limited to just one mechanism. They've got several choices. So I think the Australian experience really shows how a statutory mandate to consider gender equality combined with multi-employer bargaining, combined with equal pay laws, can really result in significant outcomes, significantly raised wages and reduce the gender pay gap. I'll move on to the second question quickly about sort of what challenges remain in Australia. So the wage increases for occupations and industries where there is gender-based undervaluation, that remains a major challenge, and there are still many occupations to be reviewed. So far we've been able to look probably at about 10 or so occupations, but there's a very long list to look at, and it has taken a long time for some of those wage increases to come through. And of course, a significant challenge is the cost of raising those wages for all of those undervalued female-dominated occupations. It's significant, and especially so given many of them are reliant on government funding. So one of the key challenges for the union movement is to lobby and campaign to ensure that the government, allocates the funds needed to pay care workers fairly. And of course, as Jane referred to in her presentation, there are also many private companies involved in this space delivering care services, and they provide significant pushback against higher wages. They don't want to pay them because obviously it comes out of their profits. So we're having to deal with all of their claims and their arguments that these higher increases will put them out of business. I think the impact of privatisation of the care economy is a big challenge that will take a while to address. In Australia, we've had about a 30-year trend of private providers eroding standards for workers and the people that those workers care for. We've had some recent reforms that have gone some way to address that in some parts of the care economy. So we've seen some strengthening of quality standards and some legislation around adequate staffing levels. And of course, some progress on gender undervaluation of some of the work, but a lot more is needed. workers in the care economy face really unpredictable and unstable hours often, and their hours can be flexed up or down. So they essentially become a bit of an on-call workforce rather than having predictable employment. So that needs to be addressed. Ensuring that care is accessible and affordable for the users of that care, which goes to whether it's privately provided or publicly provided. And of course, improving standards, transparency, and reporting to properly resourced public regulators. They exist in some areas of the care economy and not in others. At the moment in Australia, there's a big debate going on about early childhood education and the need for a national regulator, because at the moment it's each state and territory has its own regulator, which is leading to a lot of issues. So yeah, I think the theme there is it's clear that cutting profit making out of the delivery of care services by having these services delivered publicly would be a way to address all of these issues and ensure that care workers have fair wages and conditions and citizens have decent quality of care when they need it. So I think that's my 10 minutes, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sasha, for sharing the highlights from the Australian perspective, particularly the work of the unions and how you have attempted to reduce the gender pay gap in the care sector, and also working on the reforms for equal pay law. So there's many other things that are happening, but not to say that it doesn't come with its own challenges. And we'll look forward to some more information from you as we move towards the other panelists. Now I would like to ask our next speaker, the third speaker, Ms. Joanne Cesario from KMU Philippines. Joanne, I have two questions for you. The KMU has been active in campaigns for barangay health workers. What strategies have proven effective in pushing for their recognition and fair compensation? And how does KMU link care advocacy with broader struggles such as living wages, gender justice, and democracy? Jane, the floor is yours.
Hi, sisters. First of all, I'd like to thank Sister Jane for the report, and thank you for sharing the results of the report. I think, as everyone have seen, the Philippines is currently behind in terms of not only care work but labor rights in general. So it's actually very interesting to talk about the efforts of the labor movement in the past few years. I will share a bit about the first question, but I think I also got another question which I wanted to answer, but I will link it to the second one. So it's not just KMU, but actually the labor groups have been actively campaigning for barangay health workers. When we talk about a barangay, it's more like a village, no? And we traditionally have some health workers in the village level in the country, but they aren't considered as workers, but are considered as volunteers, no? So that's how the government treats care workers in the country. Instead of providing and upholding the labor rights, they are considered as volunteers with no job security and no living wages. I will talk a bit more about that later, but I wanted to talk about care as a public good, no? It's something that we've been campaigning for a long time. KMU has been very active in campaigning for care, not just as a public good, but as a fundamental human right. And when we talk about this, when we say this, we mean that the state has a primary responsibility. So the state should be the primary provider of care, and the state should be responsible for the provision, funding, regulation of care services. We in KMU have long been calling on the Philippine government to increase public investment in care and ensure access to high-quality public services such as health, education, housing, clean water, and childcare. And some of these we've been successful, no? So KMU has been part of the movement for free education in the tertiary level, something that took decades to accomplish, but there's still a long way to go. we have long emphasized that quality public services directly links to a reduction in the burden on women to provide care and will thereby boost women's participation in the labor force. Some of the concrete steps that we've been taking every year, KMU actively monitors and engages in the deliberation of the national budget. So every year there's congressional hearings, so it's in the parliament to ensure so there's CSOs, unions can participate in that, and we actively engage in that to push for sufficient public investment in care. So historically, the Philippine government has prioritized funding for infrastructure projects such as public highways, big buildings, and it has been very prone to corruption, something that I want to talk a little more about later because it directly links with the issue of democracy, as well as military spending. So meanwhile, funding for care remains very low. This is why a campaign for the reallocation of the national budget to quality public services is always crucial. So I want to address the second question and take some more time to talk about it. So the Sister Jotica's question is on how the issue of care links with living wages, gender justice, and democracy. So care work, I think as we all know, is undervalued labor. So care workers in the Philippines, such as teachers, daycare workers, health workers, nurses, earn poverty wages. Earlier, I talked about the case of barangay health workers, something that is very peculiar and something that is very particular in the Philippines. So when we talk about barangay health workers, they are basically stationed in small clinics in villages. So there's really no approximation of what a barangay is, but it's basically like a small unit, small community in the Philippines. And supposedly the local government receives funding from the national budget, which will ensure that care workers, even in the barangay level, will receive living wages. However, the situation in the country is that barangay health workers receive allowances. No? So they aren't even considered as workers. That's why they aren't compensated for the labor that they do. Meanwhile, even some of the daycare workers also receive the same kind of treatment. So there's a gap between the prevailing wages, no? So not just of care workers, but even of minimum wage earners in the country and what we call the family living wage, or what a family with 5 members need in a day to live decently. So right now, 1,200 pesos is what a family needs in a day with 5 members. And the highest minimum wage in the Philippines is 695 pesos, which is just half of the living wage, and that's the highest. So in some regions in the country, wages go as low as 400 pesos, which is just 1/3 of what we consider a living wage. On top of that, a gender wage gap persists. So women perform a disproportionate share of care work. In times of crisis, women bear increased care burdens due to underfunded public services because we don't treat care as a public good, and overstretched healthcare systems. So this is something very important in the Philippines because in a country like ours, typhoons are devastating communities, not just on a monthly basis, but even on a weekly basis. When typhoons devastate communities, the marginalized groups, the vulnerable groups, are disproportionately affected. Meanwhile, the government prioritizes profit-driven climate action and also the privatization of essential care services. So this issue also is a big issue for women workers because it raises out-of-pocket expenses for health, clean water, education, and it even exacerbates the already high living costs in the country and the poverty wages and food insecurity in the country. So as I've talked about earlier, the government has prioritized funding infrastructure projects. Right now, the country is in political turmoil. In the past, in the past few months, it was exposed that majority of the flood control projects, basically these are projects that would supposedly mitigate the impacts of flooding in the vulnerable communities and would supposedly unburden women from the care work, the extra care work that we have to do on top of the multiple burdens that we face every day. It was exposed that it has been a source of corruption. So this issue has been threatening democracy in the country. So while care workers, while women have been working hard to provide for our families, so our taxes are funding the lavish lifestyles of government officials. And this is a very important issue in the Philippines right now. So this is a crucial time for workers to demand accountability and transparency. And this is a very crucial time as well for labor unions, for the labor movement to campaign even further for care as a public good. It's a crucial time for us to emphasize that care is a fundamental human right and that this is where our taxes and funds should go if we want to ensure a more inclusive, democratic, and participatory society. Thank you.
Very interesting, Joanne, coming from a different perspective where care workers are treated as a peculiar group and are treated as volunteers. Some very interesting facts coming out from your experience, and you have correctly linked living wages to the need for the sector of workers, including the need for gender justice for this group of workers. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective, and we look forward to listening to you in the next round as well. I would like to move on to the next speaker, who is also from the Philippines. Welcome, Ms. Adriana. You are from the Pinoy Care Workers Transnational, and I would like to pose one or two questions to you. How are unions like Pinoy Care Workers Transnational supporting Filipina migrant care workers? And drawing from the ILO resolution on decent work and the care economy, what challenges still remain in the Philippines in ensuring that the Philippines National Care Economy Framework does deliver for care workers, especially those that are most exposed to exploitation and marginalization, and those in need of care? So I would like to now ask Adriana to respond to these questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jatika. So we're very proud, actually. Pinay Care Workers Transnational is one of a kind. It is the first and only transnational union of migrant domestic workers, and we're both active in the Philippines and abroad. Right now, we're active across Asia and the Middle East, and our role as a federation is to amplify the voices of our affiliates, particularly through supporting their local campaigns, and also acting as almost like an industrial federation in attempting to at least address the issues and the interests of these workers who are hardly ever seen, spoken to, or recognized. It's actually through this capacity that we helped in crafting the ILO resolution when we were part of the delegation at the ILC last year. And while the resolution did acknowledge that care work is essential, no, it makes all other work possible, we are actually quite we were disappointed in the lack of recognition for migrant workers and securing the rights of migrant workers, given in particular the amount of value brought in by migrant workers to this care economy. It was really actually frustrating, the lack of insights that were included in the resolution to cater to this, to the millions of workers that are part of the care economy. But still, coming from the Philippines, there are a lot of commitments that our state has released. In particular, it's ratified Convention 189 on domestic work. It's also ratified Convention 190 on violence and harassment. And it is also seen as a standard bearer or like a standard setter in terms of migration policy. And this is also why we're quite we have so much to do in terms of actually realizing the vision that all these commitments are pointing towards. Case in point, after 13 years, the Philippines, after 13 years of ratifying Convention 189, our local domestic workers still cannot, they don't feel the benefits of Batas Kasambahay or the domestic workers law. Something very simple as registering domestic workers at the barangay level, at the local level, is not done. Therefore, we don't actually know how many domestic workers are in the Philippines. Government numbers plummet from 400 to 1 million, 1 million plus workers. This tells us that our government does not actually know the people it's meant to serve. And for wages, for example, Sister Joanne was talking about the living wage for Filipino workers. And this don't apply to domestic workers in the Philippines, where the highest minimum wage is now 7,000 pesos, which is less than 120 US dollars a month. So if you consider the living wage that Sister Joanne was talking about, it's absolutely nothing. It's not enough for a week of necessities. But we are, therefore, I think the work that we do through Pinay is so critical because our affiliates are the ones that are able to push at the local level the campaigns needed to improve the conditions of care workers, one local at a time. In the Philippines, that means negotiating at the wage boards, making sure domestic workers are represented, and we are able to raise the minimum wage one region at a time. Side note, we do want to eventually reach a point where there is no regional wage scheme, but while this is our current system, our union, will continue to push for higher minimum wages in the regions where we are active. Abroad, it's a lot of the same thing, actually. We want to highlight the victory of our affiliate in Hong Kong. After decades of struggle, they have secured the right to negotiate every year for an increase in wages, in food allowances, and other necessities. And so that's a major win because through the work of the unions, there's actually a level of recognition and security that comes with their ability to associate and represent themselves. Another major concern for all of our affiliates and all care workers is their access to social protection. Again, both in the Philippines and abroad, this is a chief concern. Let me start with our local context. Our domestic workers are not they're not really able to contribute to the social protection systems currently available to them simply because their wages are so low. And if they are not recognized or they're not registered by their employers, they're not seen as workers, therefore their employers are not contributing. And so the burden is actually greater on them compared to workers in the formal economy. So that's so twisted and absolutely unacceptable 13 years after the passage of the Domestic Workers Act. And a lot of these scenarios are the same abroad, where, for example, our members in Macau, they keep coming home sick because they don't have even the simplest health insurance available to them. And of course, the work of domestic workers, it never stops. It's 24/7. They hardly rest. They work with chemicals, and there's no real freedom, especially for workers who are live-in or are under the kafala system in the Middle East, for example. And linking that again to the Philippines, their wages abroad are also so small that they cannot prioritize paying into social protection schemes in the Philippines, which means they are handicapped when they return home they can't retire. There's no safety net for them. And so much has to be done in terms of securing proper reintegration for the care workers from the sending countries, not just the Philippines, but the sending countries, to make sure that there is ample support given to migrants before they go abroad, while they're abroad, and especially when they do return, and especially for domestic workers and care workers who are most vulnerable. And this is why the work of PNAE is also so important, because we're able to, for example, conduct studies on existing reintegration programs with the Department of Migrant Workers here in the Philippines, so that we might finally design proper reintegration programs that can cater to the most vulnerable of sectors. We're also, of course, working to promote standard contracts in the destination countries, because again, like Macau, there is no standard contract to be spoken of. But in other countries, like in Malaysia, where another one of our affiliates are active, their standard contracts are not actually implemented. There are workers who don't have access to their days off or their paid leaves. It's almost, no, it is tantamount to forced labor if a worker has no access to their leaves. So we actually know of workers in Malaysia who have not taken a single leave in 23 years. So if that's not forced labor, I don't know what is. So it's deeply problematic that we keep sending workers out into conditions that are not safe for them, to address the needs of countries that are not willing to give them safety nets or protection while they're giving essential services. And we also let our workers down the moment they come home, and there's nothing left for them, and they need to keep working, and there's no retirement. And so we are also, of course, attempting as it is within our power to address the strength of the private sector in the Philippines in terms of migration policy. It is profit-oriented, it is labor migration oriented, and so with what recognition PNAE is given, and we're proud to say it's getting stronger by the day. We have now access to platforms to push for the interests of our workers, for negotiation and policy building, and contributing to things like the National Policy, Care Economy Policy Framework, in which we want to insert the interests of the most invisible of our workers. So again, just to highlight, no wages, social protection, standard contracts, and leaves, as well as reintegration, are some of the things that we will continue to highlight, both locally and at the national level, and whenever possible at a more global level, when we are part of conversations that talk of the issues faced by our care workers. But again, as a union, we're very proud to be part of a strong and a movement that's growing stronger by the day. We're happy to see CARE take a central role in the discussions among trade unions as well. And so we're thankful for the opportunity to highlight the experiences and struggles of our members, but we know that it's not something that's given. Everything that we're speaking of is a struggle every single day, but we're happy that the recognition is growing and our capacity to negotiate on our terms is growing as well. So I'd like to leave it at that, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation later on.
Thank you, Adriana, transnational worker indeed, both in your own country and also in the destination countries. And you have very well linked care work to migrant workers. I think this also makes them the most vulnerable group in terms of migrant workers. And also you did mention the importance of ratification of standards, ILO conventions, Convention 189 and 190 in particular. And also in terms of the reintegration program, the standard contracts, and also the need for data and statistics that you related to the work that you do. Thank you very much for that, and we'll get back to you in the question and answer session. Now I'd like to move to our final speaker for this intense panel discussion and very interesting panel discussion. We have Miss Karen Palmer from CUT Chile. And Karen, you have a few long questions, and I would like to quickly mention them to you, Karen. So Chile's unions have pushed for pay equity, ratification of ILO conventions, and a 40-hour work week. How have these wins advanced the care agenda in Chile, and specifically in relation to Chile's new national system of support and care? And we'd also like you to mention, drawing from the ILO resolution on decent work and the care economy, what challenges still remain in Chile in ensuring that Chile's new system, national system of support and care, does deliver for care workers and those in need of care? And also, if you could shed some light on the elections approaching, with the elections approaching in 2025, what are the CUT's key messages to political leaders regarding care as a human right and a public good? Welcome, Karen, and you have the floor.
Bueno, primero agradecer este intercambio en una globalización que, en un mundo que es globalizado y que hoy día nos permite poder conocer las distintas problemáticas. Creo que es valorable que pongamos al centro un tema tan necesario como son el reconocimiento de los cuidados. Quería partir por comentar el cambio cultural que está viviendo Chile en materia de poder hacer un reconocimiento del cuidado como un concepto fundamental para la sociedad. Hoy día no se puede estar en un espacio del ámbito social, ya sea político, sindical u otro, sin considerar que el cuidado como un tema a tratar. Y creo que eso es muy importante porque establece una agenda de país que se viene arrastrando desde décadas, desde programas como Chile te cuida, que impulsó la presidenta Michelle Bachelet, o programas que vinieron de continuidad en su segundo gobierno y hoy día con medidas tan, yo diría, desde lo práctico, pero que también han contribuido a mejorar la calidad de vida, sobre todo de mujeres trabajadoras, como lo que tú mencionabas, que tiene que ver con 40 horas, el proyecto de ley que aún no sale del Parlamento, pero que es la brecha salarial, pero también tenemos muchas medidas de conciliación de vida laboral y familiar. Es más, existe hoy día en Chile una ley que se habla de conciliación vida laboral y familiar, que establece cierto mecanismo para que las mujeres puedan estar en su trabajo y también estar y poder cuidar, y hombres también. Es más, hoy día estamos discutiendo un importante proyecto que es Sala Cuna para Chile, que entrega a nivel universal en el tema de los cuidados a niños y niñas menores de 2 años el derecho a sala cuna a hombres y mujeres. Entonces, en el marco de la corresponsabilidad, eso es un tremendo avance, el pensar que hombres y mujeres pueden tener el derecho a que sus hijos e hijas vayan a lugares, a jardines infantiles o a lugares que puedan tener estos cuidados. Es fundamental que, bueno, en este contexto es que el mundo sindical ha podido ser un aporte desde instalar yo diría, unos conceptos que nosotros veníamos trabajando durante décadas. Hoy me toca ser a mí la vicepresidenta de la CUT, pero habían compañeras que anteriormente ya venían impulsando la necesidad de tener una agenda de cuidado, de reconocer a las mujeres, de reconocer el trabajo doméstico, y hoy día podemos decir que eso está muy presente en la agenda. La semana pasada, por primera vez, Chile hace un cálculo de lo que significa el trabajo de cuidado no remunerado como aporte al Producto Interno Bruto, situando que hoy día, si nosotros reconociéramos ese trabajo, significaría el 19,3% de nuestro PIB, y eso le da un realce no solo desde el punto de vista que el cuidado debe ser tomado como una necesidad o como una política social de gasto, sino que también como un aporte a la contribución económica del país y a su crecimiento. Dentro de los desafíos que también, bueno, nosotros hemos puesto al centro con distintas acciones, tiene que ver con trabajar, cuidar es trabajar. Creo que eso sí ha sido de los temas más complejos que hemos vivido en la instalación de la política, porque si bien hoy día estamos en un proceso de tramitación de un proyecto de ley que es el del Sistema Nacional de Cuidados, ha sido esto en una etapa principal que es registrar a todas las mujeres cuidadoras y entregarles un beneficio que es una credencial que les permite acceder a políticas sociales con priorización. Y también a ciertos servicios que por su calidad les es mucho más dificultoso acceder. Estoy pensando en, por ejemplo, ir al banco, hacer algún trámite. Hoy día Chile está avanzando en poder tener un reconocimiento que permita que ese tipo de trámites se les facilite a las personas cuidadoras. ¿Dónde ha estado el acento nuestro como movimiento sindical? Es que creemos que debemos avanzar en que estas mujeres y hombres que cuidan tengan derecho a trabajo decente. Y eso significa un salario y seguridad social. Hoy día Chile todavía los considera como un estipendio. Estamos hablando que se les da aproximadamente $40, para hacerlo en lenguaje internacional, que ese es el pago que reciben por cuidado, y nosotros decimos, bueno, ellos debieran acceder al salario mínimo que en Chile hoy día está en $530. Y también a prestaciones sociales como el tema de seguridad laboral, seguridad salud laboral en sus espacios de trabajo y considerar las contribuciones para que puedan tener una pensión. En este caso, nosotros hemos planteado que todos estos mecanismos deben ser parte hoy día no solo de reconocer, sino que también de considerarlas como parte del mundo del trabajo. Cerrar también diciendo que, bueno, hoy día nosotros estamos en proceso eleccionario, tenemos una cantidad importante de candidatos y candidatas a la presidencia, y la CUT ha instalado una agenda que tiene dos temas centrales, que uno podría decir que son transversales al mundo del trabajo. Uno es avanzar en una política de salario vital. Nosotros hasta ahora tenemos salario mínimo, y hemos situado que nuestro país debiera avanzar en un ingreso suficiente que le permita a los trabajadores y trabajadoras vivir, y también impulsar la negociación ramal que no tiene, que hoy día nuestro país no la tiene, y que creemos que debe ser relevante. En este punto de la negociación ramal es que también se inserta la demanda de cuidados. Nosotros hemos hecho desde la organización sindical distintos documentos que hablan de cláusulas de género para impulsar en la negociación colectiva como parte de lo que es la agenda de cuidados. Y bueno, y ahí hay un capítulo importante, digo, porque este se transforma en un texto que se le ha presentado a los candidatos y candidatas, en el caso de Chile, del mundo progresista, que es el que representa las ideas que pudieran abordar temas tan relevantes como el cuidado, jornada, salario y otras materias que nuestro país viene discutiendo hace un tiempo. Cerrar agradeciendo el espacio, agradeciendo este valioso intercambio y que permitan que un país tan al sur del mundo pueda contar también su experiencia en una materia tan relevante para el mundo del trabajo. Gracias.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing some of the work that you do. Indeed, a lot of work happening there in terms of the care work. And how you leverage your work with the political space. It was interesting to know that you have a bill about the national system of care, and also effort to make registration possible for the care workers, and also advancing policy on living wage. I think that is very good work that you are doing there, including the importance of CBAs. So thank you very much for highlighting those aspects of the work that you do for the care workers. I would now open the floor for questions from the participants. Anybody has any particular questions or comments to make or share their experiences regarding the care work in their country may raise their hand, or even drop comments in the chat box. Do I see any hands? No. While we're waiting for some of them to think about their questions, I would like to pose a question to Jane. Jane, what recommendations would you highlight for unions in other countries or regions that want to strengthen their care agenda? So some added recommendations in terms of what work unions can do to further strengthen their care agenda. Jane.
Well, I think there's many inspiring ideas from these panelists, but I guess generally to best represent the needs of care workers, I think to emphasize again working together across unions, working with workers' associations, working with social movements to bring sectors of care workers up to a common standard and a living wage. I think that identifying gaps in care services and identifying gaps in rights for care workers is one place to start. You know, thinking about who are the most exploited and overlooked among care workers, who needs the attention the most, and maybe focusing there to begin. Working with allies and advocacy groups to promote a broad social dialogue is extremely important, I think. It is about changing how society is organized, how society views the work of women as care workers and care workers more generally. So you know, getting that broad social dialogue going and creating the momentum and the pressure on governments to introduce and to fund public care systems where they already exist. I think we're seeing the importance of using bargaining power to negotiate workplace changes and to establish broader based bargaining, especially for care workers who are very fragmented, and really focusing on raising the bottom, raising the social minimum, whether that's wages and or protections. Those would be some things I'd recommend.
Thank you, Jane, for those insights. I think those are very important, and it does not make a difference what level of development the country is from. These are the basic things or recommendations that unions can utilize to strengthen their care agenda. If I can move to the other speakers, I would like you all to think about what do you think are your union's priorities in terms of the coming period for achieving truly integrated and coherent care and support policies and systems as prescribed by the ILO resolution. So some ideas if the other panelists can share in terms of what do they think is the immediate work of the union regarding the care agenda. So Adriana has raised her hand. Adriana, you want to go first?
Yes,
Please go
Jatika,
ahead.
thank you. Yeah, for us in the Philippines, we are still working on the National Care Economy Policy Framework. So both Centro, KMU, and our other allies in the trade union movement are actively inserting the workers' perspective into this framework. And once it is launched, it will formalize the commitment of our government to the development and regulation of the care economy in the Philippines. But frankly, like so many other very good policies passed in the Philippines, it's not a guarantee of anything. So trade unions must continue to organize. We need to strengthen our locals, and we need to make sure that we're ready to fight, for example, local ordinances that will be the actual clinching point to ensure implementation on the ground. We have learned that national policies are good to have, but our local governments need to have commitments to implement these policies at the local level. And that's where we actually see change and have victories that affect the workers in the best way possible. And so for Pinay, that will mean mobilizing our Union of Local Domestic Workers, the United Domestic Workers of the Philippines, and other care economy workers in the care economy to prioritize the dignity of the workers through the raising of the minimum wage, broadening and improving the coverage of social protection, and of course, eventually including the rights of migrant workers through reintegration policies in the like within this whole national framework for the care economy in the Philippines.
Thank you, Adriana, for sharing those priorities of your union. And we hope that you are also able to integrate these policies in terms of, you mentioned Malaysia as one of those countries where you have your workers working as care workers. So it is very much interesting to see how you work across borders to be able to safeguard care workers in different countries. I would now want to reach out to Sasha. I see that you have your hand up. Sasha, you may take the floor now.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought I would mention six areas where Australian unions are doing a lot of work in trying to further both wages and conditions for workers in the care economy, but also further work on the policy settings around care for all workers. So things like flexible work and paid parental leave. I'll start with paid parental leave. Unions have been campaigning on paid parental leave for many decades in Australia. We recently, in the last 3 years, won some improvements. So it went from 18 weeks of paid leave to 26 weeks of paid leave at the national minimum wage. And the union campaign is that it should be 52 weeks of paid leave at a worker's replacement wage. And that in order to try and address the disproportionate burden of care that women face, there should be a significant portion of that leave reserved for partners and fathers on a use it or lose it basis. So that continues to be an area of ongoing focus. Our second focus is part-time work. So there's currently a major test case underway to look at part-time provisions in 11 industry awards. Obviously, we all know that women are far more likely to work part-time. And what the Commission has found in Australia is that there is a stark gender difference in many entitlements between awards that cover male-dominated industries and those that cover female-dominated industries. And workers in female-dominated industries are far more likely to be worse off in many ways. So they're far more likely to have insecure employment, more unpredictable and precarious working arrangements, lower incomes, not being fairly compensated for working at unsociable times or outside their ordinary hours, and therefore less able to manage their caring responsibilities. And obviously all of this has adverse impacts for gender equality and pay equity and are drivers of the gender pay gap. So yeah, we're looking at how to improve part-time provisions across industries and hoping to come up with a better model that can then be rolled out in all awards. The third focus is continuing work on addressing gender-based undervaluation in female-dominated industries. So as I mentioned, I think we've done about 10 or so occupations, but there's a long list to go, including both care work, but also work outside of the care economy, such as, people working in aircraft cabin crew, whose work is very undervalued, and that workforce is very female dominated. Also workers in, retail and hospitality. So lots of industries to go there. The fourth thing I'll mention is reproductive leave. So one of the major campaigns of the Australian union movement at the moment is for 10 days paid reproductive leave to be a national minimum standard for all workers. And that would cover a broad range of conditions. So everything from menstruation to menopause to chronic conditions like endometriosis, fertility treatments like IVF, reproductive health services like hysterectomies and terminations, as well as preventative healthcare for cancer screening and things like that. As well as workers being able to request flexibility and workplace accommodations where they need it because of any of these conditions. So at the moment, our focus is on campaigning for that, but also bargaining for paid reproductive leave and entitlements in enterprise agreements to build the case for why the leave is needed, and to show that if employers give their workers paid reproductive leave, it's okay and the sky doesn't fall in. And obviously this has been identified as an issue that's really important because of the impact of reproductive health on women's workforce participation. And the reality in Australia, what the research is telling us is that many women are forced into early retirement or have to reduce their working hours because of reproductive health issues. The fifth thing I'll mention is childcare. So for many decades, unions have been campaigning for free and universal early childhood education and care. There have been some positive steps taken by the Labor government. Recent reforms mean that all families will be entitled to 3 days a week of subsidised care. So it's a positive step forward, but there's obviously a way to go before we have free and universal childcare that is accessible everywhere in Australia equally. Currently, there is not adequate services in rural, remote areas. And finally, the last thing I'll mention is a work from home test case that is underway for office workers, where unions are advocating that those workers should have the right to request work from home arrangements in their award, and employers only able to refuse that on reasonable business grounds. So again, trying to advance the kind of policy settings around managing care responsibilities. And we know the research tells us that working from home has been a massive benefit to working women. It means they can work more hours and better manage their work and care responsibilities. So that's another test case at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Sasha. A lot of interesting information that has been highlighted by you in terms of the work that the unions are doing in Australia. And for me, it is very interesting to note that there are various kinds of reproductive leave that you are campaigning on. And if I may share, in Fiji currently, we are undergoing a labor law review. And one of the issues that is on the agenda for the trade unions here to seek review in the legislation is menstruation leave. So I wish you a lot of success in the campaigns that you are leading as manager legal and industrial for the ICTU, because in our region we usually follow or take cue from the Australian legislation and the New Zealand legislation. So it is very interesting to note that you have really advanced in the work in terms of protection for the care workers. Thank you for highlighting those initiatives. And if I may now move to Karen. Karen, you would like to share what are your union's priorities in the upcoming period for achieving some coherent care and support policies? Karen?
Sí, claro. Bueno, lo primero tiene que ver con una alianza que ya estamos impulsando con varias organizaciones de mujeres cuidadoras. Que si bien no se han constituido como sindicatos, se han agrupado como organizaciones de la sociedad civil para pelear por sus derechos que tiene que ver con ser reconocidas. Principalmente mujeres que se dedican al cuidado permanente y que no tienen una actividad laboral remunerada. También creo que un segundo tema, que también estamos en algo incipiente, es el mundo de la academia. Hoy día tenemos alianza con 2 universidades que han contribuido desde el punto de vista teórico para que el mundo sindical también tengamos insumos para dar el debate en términos de cuidado, realizando importante experiencia como la que comentaba en la exposición anterior. Sacamos hoy día un manual nosotros de cláusulas de género para la negociación colectiva con ellos. Y también hemos estado impulsando 2 estudios de investigación respecto a la situación del cuidado en Chile y cómo afecta esto a la productividad y en el desempeño de las mujeres en particular. Lo tercero es que hemos iniciado una serie de iniciativas que son desde lo más particular. Voy a comentar una que es que en lugares donde haya una cantidad de más de 100 personas tenga que haber un espacio de cuidado, y eso significa también que en el mundo sindical tenemos que adecuarnos a esa necesidad. Y hoy día también la creación de el AM es un sistema de cuidado de personas mayores que ha sido una principal demanda del mundo del trabajo, porque no es solo el cuidado de niñas y niños, sino que también de personas mayores y personas en situación de discapacidad. Y lo tercero, nosotros hemos venido en estas leyes particulares para atender algunas temáticas. Tenemos una ley que es la ley TEA, que habla de cuidados o de ciertas condiciones para mujeres y hombres que están a cargo de personas con aspecto autista. Y también la ley sana para personas que tengan una enfermedad grave, hijos e hijas o personas dependientes, que se le entrega unos permisos a los trabajadores. Hoy día nosotros estamos impulsando el tema de los permisos menstruales y también la necesidad de, le hemos llamado permisos de urgencia o SOS, que ya algunos sindicatos lo tienen en sus cláusulas de negociación y que tiene que ver que con urgencias de cuidado las trabajadoras o trabajadores puedan acceder a estos permisos. Esas medidas que son bien particulares las hemos hecho llevar a documentos, las hemos discutido con las organizaciones sindicales, pero lo fundamental, yo diría, es que el cuidado esté en la agenda del movimiento sindical. Ha sido una lucha permanente de que efectivamente cuando tenemos temas como lo mencionaba anterior, salario, jornada, etcétera, muchas veces cuesta incorporar como un tema prioritario en la agenda del movimiento sindical el tema del cuidado, y creo que esa es una de las tareas que tenemos que hacer permanente desde las organizaciones y sobre todo desde las organizaciones de mujeres. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Karen. Indeed, some more interesting experiences that you have shared in terms of the trade union negotiations regarding leaves. And I also realized that care is both ways. It's also receiving care and also giving care. So I think it also means a lot of work for the unions to be able to respond to the needs of these different types of care work. Thank you very much once again. And I have one final question to each of the panelists. And I'll start with Jane. So the question is the same for all of the panelists. What message would you like to share with trade unions worldwide on this International Day for Care and Support? Jane, over to you.
Thank you. I think learning about what's happening in other countries and being inspired by their strategies and accomplishments is very important. There's tremendous work going on around the world by unions and social partners to strengthen the care economy. This report documents recent development in 3 countries, and there was an earlier report that I worked on for the ITUC, I think published in 2022, that has very interesting developments in 5 other countries. So I think sometimes I know I get a bit discouraged about what's going on in my own country. I'm very aware of the struggles and how hard it is to make gains. So I find it really interesting and inspiring to see what people are doing in other countries, what gains they are making, what strategies they're using, and what might be adopted at home. So I think having one of the things that I gained from this research was the importance of having a vision that's big, that's bold, that's comprehensive, and that's strategic for public universal care systems. And to develop an education plan with members and the broader society, to have collective bargaining goals and a legislative agenda. That's really important to have these three elements. And as I keep saying, working together with other unions and social allies to mobilize for change, because it's only through that mobilization that we'll have the power to affect the change that we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And Adriana, what would be your message on this day, International Day?
Thank you. For us, if we could say to trade unions, please embrace, organize, and fight for informal workers. That's been our struggle, both locally and abroad. Even in the Philippines, we struggle to be recognized, even if there's already laws recognizing domestic workers as workers. But we leave behind people who are, say, part-time workers who work for maybe 3 or 4 employers. So we need to be considering these workers in all of our planning and all of our organizing and campaigning efforts. And we, of course, wish to explore further how we might organize the very atomized nature of this industry. We're stuck at home. We don't have days off. Therefore, we must see what opportunities are there for us to actually use to reach the workers that are hardly seen, hardly heard, and to give them the opportunity to then leverage their experiences and their numbers. We're everywhere. There are millions of us, but we are not right now very organized. So it's the hope of Pinay that more transnational unions will be formed, that our model will be a source of hopefully inspiration for other nationalities as well, so that we, along with other migrant workers in the destination countries, may join the voices of migrant workers together, as it's being done already, for example, in Hong Kong. But still, no, a lot has been done already, but so much has yet to be done. And so we ask our solidarity partners, our brothers and sisters in the trade union movement to help us organize migrant workers, help us fight for freedom of association, even if we're migrants, help us fight for our rights. So simple, so basic, but hardly gained. So that is from the bottom of the heart of the migrant domestic workers and care workers, is just hear us, see us, help us organize ourselves, and we'll be there to also be in support of your local campaigns and battles as well.
Thank you, Adriana, for your key messages. Sasha?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I would share that despite the many challenges that we all know exist in trying to advance work and conditions in the care economy in Australia, it has been possible just recently, just in the last 3 years, to win significantly improved wages and conditions for some workers in the care economy and good policy settings around care for a lot of workers. But none of that would have been possible without the work that came before, and that was decades of campaigning on key issues and discussions amongst unions and forming positions and talking to members and taking members to parliament and lobbying and all of that really hard work that goes on. And I remember the ACTU Secretary Sally McManus talking to a big conference of union officials a couple of years ago after we won a lot of these reforms, and she really wanted to stress that all of the work that you've done over the decades and years that felt hard and when we had a horrible Conservative government for 10 years that were just attacking workers every day, and we held the line, and maybe we advanced like a tiny little fingernail up the wall, all of that was worth it, because now we have a sympathetic Labor progressive government, and we've done the hard work, and we can take advantage of this opportunity to get some really significant wins on the board. So I think I just really want to emphasize that Australia looks like it's doing really well at the moment, and we are, because we're lucky and we have a progressive government, but it would not have happened without incredibly hard work that came in the decades before. And of course, good laws are only as good as how you use them. So it's been up to unions to make the best possible use of those laws, and they have. They've been making hay while the sun shines, so that when the Conservative government is eventually re-elected, hopefully it'll be very difficult for them to roll back those reforms, because they'll be so entrenched and embedded by unions. And that's been a big focus of the ACTU, to make sure that unions have been united in what we've called for in terms of law reform and policy reform. And then we're united in getting the best possible outcomes when we use those laws. So we do a lot of coordination with legal and industrial cases, and the ACTU provides a lot of support to unions to make sure we get really good decisions and good precedents. And all of that has led to the opportunity for unions to organise around those new laws and those new policies. And it means that union membership is now growing for the first time in decades. So yeah, that's what I want to share.
Thank you very much indeed, Sasha. And finally to Karen for your key message for today.
Sí, bueno, cuidar, yo creo que el mensaje que tenemos que transmitir es que cuidar es trabajar, y eso requiere de trabajo decente y un amplio aspecto de lucha de los sindicatos y organizaciones, porque eso se pueda conseguir. El reconocimiento, la necesidad de que los países valoren no solo como como el cuidado, como una demanda solo del mundo social, sino que también como un aporte a las sociedades. Creemos que es fundamental pensar también que no hay avance en las sociedades, en su desarrollo, si no tenemos presente y reconocemos el tema del cuidado. Cerrar también diciendo que hoy día, en este día que conmemoramos, debe ser un compromiso de las organizaciones por transformar la vida de los trabajadores, y en particular de las mujeres trabajadoras, que durante décadas han visto invisible las dobles y triples jornadas que han tenido, y que no se ha reconocido lo suficiente hoy día la necesidad de esta avance que debiera ser tener en todas las sociedades el concepto del cuidado como un eje fundamental dentro de la política nacional. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Karen. And we are right on the dot in terms of time. So I'd like to thank you all, participants and panelists. Firstly, to the panelists for the rich discussions and the sharings that you have done today, particularly to Jane for writing up this very interesting report that we would continue to use in our work that we do as lobbyists for care work. Thank you once again, panelists. I think you all have been doing a great job. You did a very great job in terms of bringing out your ideas and your experiences today on this occasion. And I thank you once again for being available and participating in this ITUC webinar. With that, I would also like to thank the participants who have been with us all throughout and listening to the discussions. And I know this has been useful for you to be able to work and replicate some of these ideas in the countries that you work in. I would also like to thank, on behalf of all of us, the interpreters that have been working behind the scenes and during this webinar to take our messages across in the various languages. Also to the ITUC team and the leadership that has put together this webinar and made it possible and successful today. Finally, I would like to wish you all success in the work that you do for the care workers and all the other work that you do in your unions, and wish you all a fruitful day on the occasion of International